this would probably be a good time for me to breathe, and ask if any of you have any particular questions that you'd like to ask, either about the publishing, or about the television show, or about Culloden, or about general history, or anything that you'd care to learn. Yeah, back there.
Also, hi. I'm just I work for the university here, and they teach you work on a number of different courses. And I was really struck by what you were saying, how it's been sold just as about everything out there, from horror to sci-fi to science fiction, and doesn't mean anything, genre is just a label that booksellers put on. I was just wondering if you have an idea of what kind of courses universities teach you on. Do you get feedback of that sort? Do you know what you're being taught and what people do with you?
No.
And if you'd like to do it,
No, I'm very flattered to hear that. As a matter of fact, every once in a while I will hear from someone, that Berkeley, for instance, is teaching my books, or all of them, in a literature class, or Oakland or something places, teaching them in a gender studies class, or in a women's studies class, and so forth, which I always think is so peculiar. The books were originally sold as romance, just because the publisher couldn't think of anything else to call them. They weren't romance, and they knew it, but they said, of all the things that your books could be, romance is the single biggest market, so we want to call it a romance. And I said to my agent, I got a couple of objections to this. I said, I read romance novels, I know what I wrote isn't. And I said, well, yes, I can perceive this. And they said, problem is, I will never be reviewed by any literarily respectable thing like the New York Times. And I said, that does not really bother me. I said, what does bother me is it will cut off the entire male half of my audience if you call them romance novels. And he said, well, I understand, he was a man. He said, we could insist that they call them science fiction or fantasy because of the other elements. He said, but bear in mind, a bestseller in science fiction and fantasy is 50,000 in paperback. Bestseller in romance is 500,000. I said, you got a point. So our agreement was that we would allow them, the hardcover would of course be just general fiction, but we would allow them to sell the paperback of Outlander as romance, provided that I had dignified covers, no mad bosoms, no hair. I managed to keep people off my covers, at least in the U.S. UK, not so lucky. But oh God, you should see the Russian ones. They're actually not bad. They actually showed scars on Jamie's back, which most of them don't. Yeah, the Lithuanian ones are kind of impressionistic. It's the Finnish ones that are totally strange. I have to look at things that come in the mail and thinking, where did this come from? Which book is this? But I mostly just look at the length. If I know that my book in English is like this and it comes back like this, something's fishy. But anyway, what was I saying? I lost my train of thought entirely. Come back in a second. Yes.
Is that me?
Yeah.
Evening, Diane.
Yeah.
I'm Paul. I'm from Elgin, and can I just speak two wee things?
Yeah.
First of all, they say that in everybody is a book, and I was explaining to somebody in the queue outside that I had a book in me once.
Yeah.
You stole it.
Sorry about that.
Just about every breathtaking scene that you use in Outlander, and every shot that came along where there was a scene to be made and a bit of drama, you finished that as well. But yours turned out a lot better, and mine's never got finished.
Well, you never know, but you should finish it.
I also wanted to thank you on behalf of the members of the group to stop the development here at Culloden, because I know you took a wee bit of interest in that. To stop the houses, and you'll be pleased to know that to this date, not a brick has been laid. So thank you very much for taking an interest. And I wanted to ask you your thoughts on, do you think I'm bonkers? Every year, friends, people that are in this room, we have a commemoration midnight service here at Culloden before the main commemoration happens on the Saturday. And we have poetry, a bit of music, fire, and it's absolutely fantastic. And the real true lovers of Culloden, they all go home, but I stay. And I've been here now doing this for many years, and I am asleep on the battlefield or just spend the night walking around. And to the people from the trust, don't panic. I'm not trying to detent or anything like that. I just take my time to take the whole ambience of the place in. What I'd like to ask you is, apart from am I bonkers, what do you think I should think about when I'm actually here? I mean, when you walk around the battlefield, what impression do you get from the ambience of the area?
A lot of battlefields are not haunted. This one is.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Gettysburg is the only other place I felt anything like that. And it's there's a place called Pickett's Charge there, and the feeling that you get on this field and on that one comes from the same thing. It's the feeling of a lot of men who stood in one place for hours, knowing they were going to die.
Finally, can I just
You're not
say thank you
bonkers.
very much? I don't want to make you cry or anything.
Well, it's okay. No, it's not you. I must help you. I'm over it.
Does it actually get you that much when you come
yes.
to Culloden?
Oh, yes.
Wow.
The first time I came, as I said, I had not been to Scotland at all when I wrote Outlander. But when we sold the book and got a 3-book contract, I said to my husband, well, I think I must go and see the place. So we did. You know, we came to London, rented a car, and drove up through the Highlands, spent 2 weeks driving back and forth. And of course, one of the places we came was here to Culloden. And we walked the field. It was the old visitor center then, after that, and went back out on the field. And we were sitting on a bench near the graves of the clans, the stones there. Anyway, I sat there in silence for a little bit, and my husband said to me, he pointed at the Fraser stone, and he said, is Murtaugh buried over there? And I said, he said, I'm getting choked up over the death of somebody who doesn't even exist. And I said, maybe not, but there are a lot of people who did. And then, yeah.
Thank you. Well, finally, let me cheer you up by saying that in the latter part of season 2, a messenger is sent over to Elgin, to Thunderton House.
Yes,
in
that's right.
Bonnie Prince Charlie.
Uh-huh.
Well, the actual building, the Thunderton House, there have been many things over the years, but for the last 5 years, it's been in disrepair. You'll be pleased to know that it's finally coming together and they're going to get it set up.
Excellent.
So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, this afternoon I did a lot of interviews with people for one thing and another, and one was a gentleman named Ian Ramage, and he was asking me, why, about, the housing development and the projected pylons and things like that, because I don't talk religion or politics in public ever, and especially not in someone else's country, but I do feel obliged to talk, ecology and things like that, and landscape, because I know something about that, and I feel a responsibility. So anyway, he was asking me, why did I feel that places like this should be preserved? Okay, I'm going to get mushy again, but don't worry about it. It passes quickly. And I told him that you need to preserve the physical remnants of a place. The place, the writings, the artifacts, the little bits and pieces, because the spirituality of the place is rooted in those things. And you risk losing that aspect of your personality as a culture, as a people. You need to hang on. And you have a question.
I felt assured that I was making a lot. I actually had the privilege of being an extra for the first episode of this season 2.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And I was fisherwoman in the docks down at Nyzat.
Ah.
I thoroughly enjoyed the experience of it again.
Right.
What I'd like to ask is, I'm a big fan of the TV series. I had read the book by some years ago.
Yeah.
I was a big fan of the TV series. And I thought it transferred to screen and the whole very well. But the one thing we say, I've done jacket.
Yeah.
And I had done a lot of research on my history of Prince Charles Edward Stuart. And I'm not too sure, if I'm honest, on the trade in the television series, how we actually know that there's a religion which been married, but that doesn't matter. But I think there's a lot of things. There was a lot of things. I mean, the actor I know was doing for the script. They think that's right. The actor was very good. But I think there's a lot of issues there that a lot of people who could be the Jacobites have brought up in this. And I just wondered how you felt about it, Diana, whether it had transferred, the portrayal of the prince had transferred properly from the books or not, really.
Yeah, no, I did tell them that about Prince Charlie, and I gave them, sort of a brief preface of what he actually was like and his background and so forth. And they adopted what they could of that. They gave him a slight speech impediment, and that was probably not the best thing they could have done. But it was a marked performance. They chose to exaggerate the religious element because it gave them sort of a note for him to return to. They wanted a reason for him to be monomaniacal, to pursue his quest other than just I want to do this. And so they thought by giving him this strong religious sensibility that would kind of provide a thread that led to disaster and was easily accessible to the audience, because he was a complicated person in a complicated situation. And they only have 13 hours in which to do a very complicated story. So they will simplify and condense things, I'm afraid, and sometimes that leads to distortion. Yeah, but on the whole, they do a good job. I am a consultant to the show, and so they show me the scripts and these outlines and the daily footage, and I tell them what I think about it. And I don't invariably agree with what they've done, but I do tell them, and more often than not, they'll do something about it. But when it's something like that they've decided should be a character trait, they won't be moved. But I totally take your point.
I was going to ask about you picking the name James Fraser and the coincidences that surrounded that. There are so many. In particularly, I really wanted to ask you about the Dunbonnet's Cave and the real James Fraser that was hidden in the Dunbonnet's Cave. How did you find out about that, and what did you feel when you discovered it?
Things like that happen with every single book I've written. I write something and then I find it, in the research. And when that happens, I assume that I must be on the right track with what I'm doing. But yeah, in that case, he was called Jamie to begin with, out of compliment to the Doctor Who character, who was named Jamie McCrimmon. He has nothing other than the name Jamie and the kilt in common with that character, but as a brief homage to the source. I called him Jamie, I like the name as well. But he had no last name for quite a long while, because at that point I knew nothing about the clans or the politics between them, so I wasn't sure, what he should be clan-wise. And so he was just J.D. Blank for quite a long time. Well, then, in the course of the research, I was reading a book called The Prince and the Heather by Eric Linklater. And it was about the flight of Bonnie Prince Charlie after Culloden and what happened. And it mostly followed him, but it did zigzag back to the battle periodically and deal with what happened to everybody else. And so he mentioned just this one little brief bit that said, after the battle, 19 Jacobite officers took refuge. They were wounded, and they took refuge in the farmhouse, the little bothy that's out on the moor. And he said, there they lay in pain, their wounds untended, for 2 days. At the end of this time, they were taken out and shot. He said, one man, Fraser, the master of Lovett's regiment, escaped the slaughter. The others are all buried by the field. At this point, I was far enough into the book that I kind of thought Jamie might actually survive the Battle of Culloden, and I said, in that case, his last name had better be Fraser. So that's why Jamie Fraser. And then much, much later in the research, I was just reading a book of Scottish, not exactly folklore, but historical tales, these bits and pieces that turn up. And that's where I ran into the Dunbonnet. And so it's describing this man, a Jacobite who had escaped, after Culloden, wounded and gone back to his estate where he hid in a cave for 7 years. And it said that his tenants, in order to avoid drawing attention of the English to him, I always refer to him as English in those tales, not the government, but that in order to avoid drawing attention to him, they always referred to him as the Dunbonnet for the color of the bonnet that he wore. And so I was thinking, well, obviously he was wearing a blah-colored hat because he had very colorful hair, And so I thought, well, that's interesting. Anyway, then I got down to the bottom of the story, and it said, that his name was James Fraser, and his estate was at Foyles, which you probably know.
Yeah, just an amazing coincidence.
So that sounds, one of those good goosebumps. There's good ones and there's bad ones, but that's good. Anyone else? Yes.
All of your books have particular themes.
That's exactly right.
etc.
Mhm.
But there's a continuing theme of displaced persons, whether
Exactly
they're
so. Mhm.
displaced voluntarily
Mhm.
or whether they're forced.
Exactly
No,
right.
no spoilers here, but your characters travel around a great deal.
Mhm.
Is that deliberate on your part, or did the characters just take you there, or did you research?
It's more the research, it's history. Because people often, or used to often say to me, when I left Scotland at the end of Voyager and we took up the story in America, all the books still have one foot in Scotland. They probably always will. But they said, well, why did you leave Scotland? I like Scotland, you know, I miss Scotland, I want to be there. And so did they, you know. But I said, that world is gone, you know, it was destroyed. I mean, the Scotland that you liked with the kilts and, you know, the bagpipes and the clans and so on, it's gone, it was gone. And that's why so many of them left, were displaced, were transported, were, you know, violently wrenched out of their lives. That life had been destroyed. And so, you know, it's hard for people to grasp that unless you show them the details, which we try to do in little bits and pieces, flashbacks. You know, Jamie leaving his cave and stepping on the skeleton of the little girl, things like that.
Is there any experience in your own family of being displaced?
If there is, it's a way long way back. I mentioned the Gabaldons appearing in Santa Fe in 1594. Well, there was a legend in our family that we were converso Jews and had left Spain on that account. And but you know, we didn't have any actual family history going back that far. It was just a story in the family. Well, several years ago, I was doing a Canadian book tour, and they sent me to Montreal. And they sent me in the evening to a station called Station Shalom, which was a Jewish station, which had a good book review program. Yeah, I walked in, and there were two gentlemen there wearing their yarmulkes, and we greeted each other, and it was the evening before Yom Kippur. I have a number of Jewish editors, agents, and friends, and I knew what you say to people on Yom Kippur, so I said it to them, and they were, you know, charmed. Anyway, they said, oh, we were just talking about you, you know, do you know where your name comes from? And I said, well, yes, it's a place name. It comes from a small town in Spain. And then, given the context, I laughed and said, you know, the family legend about us being Jewish and so forth. And one of them laughed, and he said, oh, it's not a legend. He said, my people come from the next village over from Gabaldon. They're all Jews up there. So, yes. And then there was the gentleman named Schweitzer who ended up as a Hessian mercenary into the American Revolution. Yes, every so often, and most of the people in both lines of the family stay put for, you know, generations and centuries, but every once in a while you get one with a wild hair. They will just travel endless distances and turn up, you know, someplace completely else. Yeah, but you're completely right about the displacement, and that is largely research, because that's what happened in history. You know, the Highland Scots were, you know, violently displaced, and not there were several Highland clearances, and that, you know, swept them out into the world and so forth. And as I said, you know, we're not in Scotland anymore because Jamie's people all went to America, and this is where they went. They went up the Cape Fear River and into the mountains because it reminded them of the Highlands in Scotland.
Have you ever felt displaced? You're quite at home where you are.
I tend to be, yeah. Yeah.
Do you live in Scotland?
Often, yeah, when I'm writing. That's the thing is, when I'm writing, I am wherever the book is. I'm not where my body is. So even in very strange circumstances, if I've got my computer or even a notebook, I can leave. I can go be somewhere else inside my head. So no, you know, I will often be in quite strange circumstances. I think Lithuania is probably the most peculiar place I've been, and that's strange. But you know, at the same time, as soon as I could be alone and gather my thoughts, you know, I was where I am.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm one of those displaced people, largely because of your books.
Oh, really?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But my question is, I assume when you wrote your first book that you didn't picture that you would write 9 or 10 more.
No.
How do you keep all the details and everything straight so that you're going in the right direction and tying everything together?
As I don't write in a straight line or with an outline, as I say, I write in bits and pieces. But those pieces fit together and they form shapes. What I'm doing is it's like playing Tetris in my head, but very, very slowly. All these pieces are drifting and they fit together. The thing is that once they have fit and made a shape, I will not forget it. I can see it. And each book has an internal shape of its own. And once I have seen the shape, which happens, you know, fairly late in the process, probably after I've been writing for 18 months to 2 years, I'll see the shape. And then the writing gets faster because I can see what's missing out of that shape, and I know that I need a piece shaped like this, and I can write that, so forth, so it becomes a little faster at that point. But at an earlier point, I get what I call critical mass, which is where the book becomes alive suddenly. I'm not sitting there every day going, well, now what am I going to write? And, searching my brain or my resources for what I call a kernel is what I need to start writing. I do this for book festivals every once in a while, or writers' conferences. I say, if you can spare me 90 seconds, I'll let you watch me write. And so say, what I need is a kernel, and that can be a vivid image, a line of dialogue, an emotional ambiance, anything I can see or sense concretely. And if I sit down on what I call a cold day, which is when nothing's happening, I knew how to write yesterday, I have no idea how to write today, what I'll do is usually go and flip through my historical resources and find a kernel. And on one of these days, I flipped through old Sotheby's catalogue of Scottish crystal and silver of the 18th century. And there was this very nice crystal goblet carved with thistles in the sides. And I said, okay, that'll do. And so I sort of set this in front of my mind's eye, and I began to write about it. And what I do when I write about a kernel is I try to make a sentence that's as clear and brief and elegant as I can make it, and that concretely describes what I'm looking at or hearing. And so I'm thinking it's crystal, it's transparent, there's light passing through it. The light passed through the crystal goblet. Okay, the light passed through the crystal goblet with the thistles, no, that's too many words. The light passed through, what does the light look like? The light's coming in low. The low light, it has to be afternoon, the light wouldn't be low. Low afternoon light, that's okay, L and L, we got alliteration. Low afternoon light of, there's something more there. It's blue light, that's odd. The low blue light of a winter afternoon, that's why it's blue, it's winter. The low blue light of a winter afternoon, that seems okay. The low blue light of a winter afternoon passed through the crystal goblet, skip the thistles, we don't need those. Okay, so what does the light do when it passes through the goblet? Well, it passes through, it doesn't just go bonk on the floor, or does it? No, it passes through, and then it casts a pool of light. Cast is a nice word. The low blue light of a late winter afternoon, do I need that? It could just be a winter afternoon. Well, the light is very low, maybe it is late, that's another realm. The low blue light of a late winter afternoon passed through the crystal goblet and fell